Hey, it's James here from eBassGuitar, and today I'm going to take you through how to set up the EQ on your amplifier and show you 4 really important tone tests you can try out. If you're just starting out using EQ, make sure you check out this lesson. So what is EQ? EQ stands for equalization, and it is essentially the bass, the middle and the treble controls which we either find on our amplifier or on our bass guitar. And these have 2 fundamental purposes. Before we get into those, I'd love to ask you guys a question. How do you use your bass guitar EQ? Do you use a lot of bass? Do you use a lot of treble? Do you cut the mid or boost the mids? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to find out. So EQ has 2 fundamental purposes or roles in my opinion. The first one is to shape and craft our bass guitar tone, and the second is to compensate for anything which may be going on in the room that you're playing in, because that can have a massive effect on your bass guitar tone. So if you're in a really boomy room, you might want to consider cutting some bass. If you're struggling to get clarity, you may want to consider boosting the mids. But the most important thing, and what we're going to focus on this lesson, because this will give you the fundamental understanding, is how to use EQ to craft your tone. And there's something I want to impress upon you at this point, and that is tone is fundamentally in 2 places, and the most important of those is in your hands. So if you're working on improving every aspect of your bass guitar playing, in turn your tone will improve and your sound will improve. 2, the second of these is your choice of instrument too. So if you have a good quality instrument with good strings, good pickups and good cabling and all of that kind of stuff, your tone will be really good. The fundamental thing here is no amount of EQ can fix a tone problem, or if you've got poor quality sound. That has to come from the source, and that's really important. So the most typical place that you'll find EQ controls is on your amplifier, and that's where we're going to focus today. But if you have an active bass, and you'll know that by checking if you've got a battery in the back of it, you may have EQ controls too. In the case of my Sadowski here, I also have a bass control and a treble control here. So how I tend to use these is I will set up my fundamental tone on the amplifier and make sure it sounds really good in the room, but then I will use the EQ on my bass guitar just to tweak from song to song to put those fine adjustments in. But today we're going to focus on using the Aguila amp I've got here. I love this amp because it fundamentally sounds really good, but also it's really simple because it basically just has bass, middle and treble controls, and to start understanding EQ, this is all you need. So I want to start off with a little tip or a little hack which I've learned over the years, and this is to always place your bass guitar amplifier to your left if you're a right-handed bass player, and have it in reach of your fretting hand. So you could either have it where I've got it here, or you could have it a little bit further down. The reason for this is we can play the open strings with our right hand like this, and then adjust settings here. This means we can always hear the sound as we're playing. And for me, this is really, really important to being able to work quickly when I'm on a gig. So it's worth saying, whenever I'm adjusting any of these controls, it's rare that I go above 2 o'clock when I'm boosting or 10 or 11 o'clock when I'm cutting. For me, this keeps the most natural and best sound, because we don't want to be using huge amounts of EQ because things can start getting a little bit out of control. So that is the bass control for adding roundness and depth to our sound. The next control we're going to look at is our treble control, and this adds top end like this. So let me play the G string, and you can hear it gradually getting brighter. And what this is going to pull out is the string noise and that zing on the top there. You might hear this used in the slap tone a lot like that. So that really useful control for that. So the next control we're going to look at, and the final of our three, and this is a little bit more complex, is our mid control here. And the mid control for us bass players, I find, is absolutely vitally important, because this is what gives our clarity. If you're struggling to hear your bass sound in the mix, it's normally because your mid control isn't quite set right. So again, I always start central like this, and what you'll hear is as I start boosting it, it will start getting a little bit more aggressive and punchy, and as I cut it, the sound will start getting a little mellower, which is really, really useful here. The tendency for most bass players is to cut mid, because that's what sounds great kind of in isolation. But the mid control is really important when you're playing with a band. Now, looking at this particular Guilla amp here, there is one more control that I want to draw your attention to, and this is the thing called the mid frequency here. I love this amp because it's simple, but some amps can get really, really complex, and EQ can become a really deep subject, but this is kind of the next layer down. So this basically allows us to focus on a specific frequency in the mid range. If we imagine our mids go from here to here on a frequency band, we can choose where we zoom in, which can be quite useful. So how I set this up, I'm really, really simple, is what I want to do is I want to boost the mids quite a considerable amount like that. And you might hear that if you boost too much, it will actually start distorting the sound a little bit. And once we've got some boosted there, we can then choose our frequency like this. And what you'll hear, the sound starts changing, and what I find is there's normally a sweet spot which suits my taste. The sweeping the mids like that is the same effect as a guitarist using a wah-wah pedal. So I'm going to find a spot which sounds really good to me. Okay, personally to me that sounds really, really good there, and then I will choose if I will boost or cut the sound like that. So that is how we set up the mid control. This is technically what we call a semi-parametric mid, but don't worry about that too much. Just experiment with the mid control and just notice how it adds that punch to the sound. So next up, we're going to go through 4 tone tests, and I'm going to show you the EQ I use for 4 different techniques on the bass guitar. I'm also going to switch off this lav mic here too, so you can hear the fine adjustments really, really clearly. So we're going to start off with fingerstyle, because this is probably what I use 80 to 90% of the time. So all I do for this is literally just boost the bass to about 1 o'clock, just to add a little bit of body to the sound if I need it. So this is what this sounds like. So next up, we're going to look at thumb style. But first off, if you're enjoying this lesson, I'd love to ask you to subscribe to the channel, because we release a lesson like this every single week, designed especially for the beginner to intermediate bass guitar player. There's a red button somewhere around this video where you can be the first to find out when a new lesson is released. So when I play thumb style, what I'm often looking for is more of a big fat double bass type sound. So I will often add some muting in with my right hand too. So this is what it sounds like without an EQ. But what I'll do to really enhance that sound is dial in quite a bit more bass. I'll take it up to round about 2 o'clock to really add the fat bottom end in there. But also what I'll often do is cut a little bit of the treble too. So I'll take that down to roughly round about 11 o'clock. So we end up with a sound more like this. So let me show you what this sounds like in context. So for the third EQ test, I'm going to show you how I set up more of a rock sound when I'm playing pick style. So this is what it sounds like flat. So what we want to do is add a little bit of bottom end. This is what I like to fatten that up with the pick. Then I like to add a little bit of treble to it to pull out the zing that the pick gives as well. But each time I'm only going up to about 1 o'clock on the boosting here, so we're not getting too ferocious. Then I like to just cut a little bit of mid 2, so about 11 o'clock there. So quite subtle changes, but this will just enhance the pick style, so we end up with more of this sound. So let's hear what this sounds like in context. So for our fourth and final tone test, I'm going to show you how I'd EQ for slap bass, because this has a very specific EQ which sounds really good. But first off, this is what it sounds like flat. So what I want to do now is add in the classic, what we call smiley face EQ. So this involves turning the bass up to round about 2 o'clock. So we get lots of bottom end. Now with the treble, I'm going to turn that up to about 2 o'clock too. Now I'm going to cut the mids now, and I'm going to take this down to about between 10 and 11 o'clock. And you'll hear this classic slap tone now, which sounds so great and gives us this smiley EQ where we boosted the bass, cut the mids and back up for the treble. So let's hear what this sounds like in context. So guys, that's the end of today's bass guitar lesson. I hope this has been a really useful insight into how to start using bass guitar EQ. The most important thing is to go away and start experimenting yourself now. But also, if you've enjoyed this lesson, make sure you jump over to eBassGuitar and check out the Bass Lab Plus. The Bass Lab Plus is a full step-by-step training program designed especially for the beginner to intermediate bass guitar player. There's a link in the description below where you can take it for a test drive completely free for 14 days. Cheers, I've been James from eBassGuitar.com, and I'll catch you for next week's lesson. Bye bye.